From a syringe sinking into the wrong neck, to blood slides glinting in Doak's hands, to Deborah stepping through a church doorway as Dexter drives a knife into Travis Marshall. From LaGuerta standing alone in that shipping container with the Bay Harbor butcher case finally adding up, to Rita floating lifeless in a bathtub while a baby cries in blood. These are not rare exceptions in Dexter's life. These are the rule. Throughout his life, Dexter Morgan insisted he was in control. A meticulous predator, a forensic expert who could kill and disappear without a trace, guided by Harry's code and protected by a dark passenger that supposedly obeyed strict rules. The narration tells a story of order, precision, and almost supernatural foresight. Yet, when the series is watched as a whole, another truth emerges. Dexter's world is a graveyard of shattered plans and unintended consequences. Let's kick things off with that tension. Dexter believes in the perfect plan: stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. But again and again, the plan collapses the moment it meets reality. Brian turns out to be his brother and hijacks the ice truck killer case. Dokes discovers the blood slides Dexter thought were the ultimate safeguard. Rita, Deb, LaGuerta, Hannah, even Angela in Iron Lake all become collateral in strategies that were supposed to keep everyone safe. In this video, we're going to dive deep into that gap between intention and outcome. The focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on what he thinks is going to happen versus what actually happens when the dark passenger hits the real world. Each perfect scheme becomes a case study in miscalculation. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, built on forensic patterns Dexter himself created. Miguel Prado twisting the code into open season murder. Trinity turning Dexter's fantasy of controlled mentorship into an event that changed his family forever. To keep this clear, the breakdown will move season by season, from the ice truck killer to the hurricane and Iron Lake. Each major collapse will be traced back to the psychology driving it. Dexter's hunger for connection, his overconfidence in the code, his blindness to how intelligent his enemies and allies really are. Along the way, the analysis will connect those failures to the long-term effects of Harry's training, the pressure of maintaining a double life, and the escalating emotional ties that make secrecy impossible. Because the central question hanging over every season is simple yet devastating. Was Dexter ever truly in control? Or was he always an alley or a last-minute pivot on a boat if they leave his world basically intact, stay in the background? The center of this video is the plans that change his trajectory, the ones that create new enemies, new investigations, or permanent damage to the people in his life. To keep that clear, let's kick things off with 3 categories of failure that will guide the entire breakdown. First, operational failures, botched kills, evidence mishandling, and tactical decisions that directly feed the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, LaGuerta's suspicions, or Saxon's leverage. Second, relational failures, moments when family, lovers, or colleagues get too close to the truth, when Miguel Prado learns the code, when Deb walks in on a kill, when Hannah or Vogel become part of a life Dexter thought he could manage. Third, existential failures, the big attempts to quit, to reinvent himself, to live by Harry's rules and still have a normal life, that end in death, exile, or an identity he can't sustain. The structure will move chronologically from season 1 through New Blood, tracking how those failures escalate Each major section will zoom in on a single plan. What Dexter thought would happen, the safeguards he trusted, the exact beat where reality breaks through, and the long-term effects of that break. Early on, that means the ice truck killer forcing Dexter to confront his past, Dokes circling the truth on pure instinct, and the Bay Harbor butcher case built from the very blood-slides Dexter created. As the seasons progress, the failures get more personal and more catastrophic. Miguel Prado's apprenticeship, Trinity, and Rita's death, Deb's discovery in that church, LaGuerta's private investigation, and the doomed attempts at escape with Hannah or reinvention in Iron Lake will each be treated as an event that changed Dexter's life path. By the end, the final escape attempt in New Blood will sit alongside the Bay Harbor butcher frame job as proof that every plan, from Miami to the snow, carried consequences Dexter could never fully control. Next, the journey begins at Season 1, where the first cracks in Dexter's illusion of control quietly appear. The journey into Dexter's collapsing plans doesn't actually start with a crime scene or a close call. It starts with a promise. Long before the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation or Iron Lake, Harry believes he has designed a master plan that will keep chaos at bay, Harry's Code. Harry Morgan is the first person to truly recognize Dexter's urges to kill, and he responds like a cop, building a case, rules, procedures, contingencies, no innocent victims, calmly preparing to kill, and the undeniable truth that he has created a serial killer with procedural polish. That moment is an event that changed both of their lives, even though only one of them fully understands it. Harry's suicide is the clearest proof that the code fails its creator. The man who wrote the rules cannot live with the reality of what those rules have produced. The supposed stabilizing system shatters at the source. Yet, Dexter, standing on the other side of that trauma, misreads the message completely. Instead of treating Harry's death as a warning that the plan itself is broken, Dexter frames it as tragic collateral damage. In his mind, the code did not fail. Harry did. This would be the start of a pattern. Rather than questioning the framework, Dexter doubles down on it, using the rules as armor to justify new risks, new intimacy, and new escalation. Every later disaster is quietly rooted here. When Dexter lets people into his secret, when he pushes the boundaries of who qualifies as a target, when he believes he can script outcomes and dodge consequences, he is still following the emotional logic Harry planted. The code tells him he can live a normal life and feed his dark passenger as long as he stays careful. Next, as Season 1 begins, that belief will be tested for the first time when the ice truck killer exposes how vulnerable Harry's plan really is to someone who understands Dexter even better than Harry ever did. Season 1 opens with Dexter believing the code has prepared him for anything. But the ice truck killer proves that an enemy who understands his past can weaponize it against him. What looks like a professional rivalry between predators quickly mutates into an event that changed Dexter's entire sense of control. Let's kick things off with Dexter's original plan. From the first dismembered body, he frames the ice truck killer as the ultimate opponent, a chance to test his skills against someone who kills with equal precision. The goal is simple. Keep it a game, keep it separate, and keep Miami Metro at arm's length from his true nature. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed he can run parallel tracks. Blood analyst by day, dark passenger by night, using the investigation as entertainment, while he secretly outplays the killer on his own terms. Brian Rudy methodically destroys that illusion. Instead of remaining a distant adversary, he starts leaving highly personalized clues. The drained bodies with no blood for the analyst who loves blood. The Barbie doll parts arranged in Dexter's freezer. The severed fingertips painted like nail polish. Each clue is a message that this killer has already discovered who Dexter really is. When the chopped-up doll is posed in a tiny recreation of the shipping container murder, the case stops being to acknowledge family as a real vulnerability makes him reactive. He arrives late, improvises, and only survives because Brian wants connection more than a clean kill. The long-term effects of this moment echo throughout his life. To end the crisis, Dexter has to kill his own brother in a room staged as a twisted family reunion, then lie to Deb about what really happened. Brian offered unconditional acceptance of his urges without a code, and Dexter destroys that possibility to preserve Harry's legacy. The cost is enormous. The one person who fully understood his darkness is gone. Deb is emotionally shattered, and Dexter learns that genuine attachment is the one variable his plans never account for. And this would be the start of a brutal pattern, where every time Dexter lets someone close, the consequences become even deadlier. If Brian was the brother who pulled Dexter toward open darkness, Rita was the opposite experiment. Could a carefully constructed, normal life hide the killer forever without ever really touching him? Let's kick things off with Dexter's original calculation. When he meets Rita, she is recovering from an abusive marriage, emotionally withdrawn, and terrified of physical intimacy. For Dexter, this is ideal. No pressure, no demands, no one probing the empty spaces where real feeling should be. Throughout his life, he has looked for structures that keep the dark passenger contained, and Rita becomes one more structure. A low-maintenance girlfriend who makes him look safe to Miami Metro, to Deb, to the neighbors, while never asking to see the truth. But quietly, the plan mutates. As Dexter spends time with Rita's children, Aster and Cody, the cover story starts generating real attachment. He walks them to school, fixes broken toys, and discovers that protecting vulnerable people can feel as compelling as stalking victims. This would be the start of a dangerous illusion that he can manage Harry's code, nightly kills, and a growing family without any part of it collapsing. Proposing to Rita, buying the house in the suburbs, and embracing fatherhood with baby Harrison are framed as choices he can juggle rather than seismic shifts that rewrite every risk calculation. The early warning signs arrive almost immediately. Dexter misses important family moments because he is tracking a target or cleaning a kill room, then scrambles to explain away bloody absences as late nights at work or sudden errands. Rita notices the constant distractions, the emotional distance, the way his eyes drift somewhere else in the middle of supposedly intimate conversations. Her trauma, none of that will just threaten his freedom anymore. It will blow back on Rita, the kids, and eventually Harrison, turning a calculated mask of normalcy into the most catastrophic vulnerability in his entire life. Dexter's perfect suburban mask only works if his professional mask holds. At Miami Metro, the plan is simple. Be the friendly, slightly awkward blood spatter guy, invaluable in the lab and at crime scenes, but never threatening enough for anyone to imagine a killer. Let's kick things off with that workplace design. Dexter builds his role the same way he builds a kill room. Every element is intentional. He brings donuts, cracks dry observations and plays the socially offbeat but brilliant analyst whose expertise closes cases for everyone else. Throughout his life, this has been the core of Harry's code in practice. Disappear in plain sight, use the badge and the microscope as camouflage, and let the dark passenger ride behind a wall of fluorescent lights and lab reports. But then there's Sergeant James Dokes. From day one, Dokes is the anomaly in Dexter's system. Where others see an awkward colleague, Dokes sees absence. No fear, no disgust, no real emotional response to the worst human violence Miami has to offer. His gut tells him something is wrong, and unlike everyone else at Miami Metro, he refuses to be charmed, distracted, or folded into Dexter's carefully managed social circle. This would be the start of a different kind of exposure. Dokes does not discover a blood slide box or a kill room first. He discovers a pattern of behavior. He tails Dexter after hours, catches inconsistencies in his stories, and calls out the dead-eyed calm at scenes that should shake any normal person. When Dexter shrugs off a dismembered body, Dokes does not laugh it off as gallows humor. He confronts it as evidence. The escalation forces a fundamental shift. Up to this point, Dexter's plan has always been aimed at the system as a whole. Avoid cameras, control evidence, stay within the rules Harry drilled into him. Now, for the first time, he has to plan around one specific person. Every late-night drive, every missing vial, every crime scene visit becomes a potential trail that Dokes might follow. The same lab access that once made Dexter feel untouchable suddenly looks like a spotlight. We're going to dive deep into how that breaks his illusion of control. The routines Harry helped him build are supposed to guarantee safety, predictable work hours, professional credibility, expert knowledge of forensic blind spots. Yet, Dokes turns each advantage into a liability. Dexter's presence at so many key scenes makes him look omnipresent. His calm demeanor, once a shield, becomes the very trait Dokes fixates on, as proof that something inhuman is rates on a simple equation. Kill by the code, drain the blood, dismember with clean, practiced cuts, and seal the remains in heavy plastic bags. Those bags go on the slice of life, out past the city lights, where he drops them into deep water, trusting weight, currents, and anonymity to erase his crimes. Throughout his life, Dexter believes the ocean is his perfect accomplice, a vast, indifferent graveyard that will never give up the truth. Then the ocean spits the truth back. A diver discovers a body. Currents shift, storms move. Soon, dozens of Dexter's victims are dragged up from the depths off Miami's coast. Media hysteria erupts, and the press christens the unknown killer the Bay Harbor Butcher. Miami Metro is pulled into a massive task force, and Dexter is forced into the most twisted role of his life, the forensic analyst investigating his own work. This is where the case quietly weaponizes Dexter's strengths against him. His precise cuts, once a point of pride, now stand out as a surgical signature. The consistent wrapping, the way joints are separated, the absence of unnecessary damage, all create a forensic fingerprint. Even his careful victim selection, guided by Harry's code, backfires. The bodies belong to criminals, abusers, and killers who slip through legal cracks, forming a pattern that an investigator like Frank Lundy can profile. Someone with access to case files, someone who knows who deserves to disappear. We're going to dive deep into Dexter's reaction, because this would be the start of a different version of him. The proactive hunter becomes a reactive saboteur. He manipulates evidence in the lab, subtly redirects theories, and steers the task force toward abstract ideas of vigilantism instead of concrete suspects. At the same time, he has to juggle Dokes, whose instincts are closing in, and Lundy, whose calm intelligence threatens to decode the dark passenger without ever meeting him. Every move Dexter makes to stay ahead exposes how fragile his system always was. One scuba diver, one storm, one shift in the tide, and the perfect plan collapses into rows of labeled bags and autopsy photos. The long-term effects of this exposure will be devastating. It teaches law enforcement exactly how to read his rituals. The irony is brutal. The precision that made Dexter feel untouchable now makes him legible, turning his life's work into a roadmap. And once that roadmap exists, someone in Miami Metro will inevitably follow it past the ocean, back to the boat, and closer to Dexter Morgan than he ever imagined. The roadmap is now on the table, and the Bay Harbor Butcher has a profile, constructs a narrative. A volatile sergeant, already known for anger and violence, finally snapped and became a vigilante killer who targeted guilty victims that slipped through the system Harry once believed in. But this is where we're going to dive deep into the plan's fractures. The entire scheme rests on a brutal contradiction. Dokes is innocent. On the kill room floor, he doesn't beg or deny. He reasons. He calls Dexter out as the real predator, challenges the dark passenger, and refuses to fit the role Dexter is writing for him. For the first time, the code is not guiding Dexter toward a kill. It is being twisted to justify sacrificing an innocent man's life to protect a lie. This would be the start of Dexter's most serious ethical collapse. Then comes the pattern interrupt that Dexter never anticipated. Lila. Drawn by obsession, not justice, she discovers the cabin, discovers Dokes, and makes an event that changed everything. She blows up the cabin with Dokes inside, erasing the one person who could articulate the truth about Dexter, and leaving behind a crime scene that perfectly matches Dexter's frame. Dexter's plan works, but not because of his control. It works because an unstable outsider adds an unplanned kill to his ledger. The long-term effects of this are devastating. And Dexter walks away as Miami embraces Dokes as the Bay Harbor Butcher, but his freedom now rests on a lie, an innocent man's death, and a murder he did not plan yet fully exploits. From this point on, every investigation into the Butcher, every mention of Dokes' name, is a reminder that Dexter's life is balanced on stolen guilt. And the next time someone in law enforcement gets close, the question will be unavoidable. How many more solutions, like Dokes, can Dexter survive? If Dokes was the consequence Dexter never planned but managed to exploit, Lila is the consequence Dexter actively invites in. She is not a cop, not family, not a suspect in the Bay Harbor Butcher case. She is supposed to be harmless cover, and that is exactly why she becomes so dangerous. Let's kick things off with Dexter's original design. Lila enters as his NA sponsor, the perfect explanation for late nights, mood swings, and emotional distance from Rita. Dexter tells a story about addiction instead of murder, turning his killing urges into a metaphor he can safely share. In theory, Lila is a pressure valve for the dark passenger, a place to vent without exposing the truth, and a shield that can explain his behavior to Rita, the kids, and anyone at Miami Metro who notices his life wobbling. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed he can compartmentalize. Kill room here, family dinner there. Then the cabin explosion. Lila tracks Dokes, finds the truth about the Bay Harbor Butcher, and makes an event that changed the entire investigation. By blowing up the cabin, she kills Dokes, destroys Dexter's improvised prison, and hands him the perfect scapegoat, all without his consent. On paper, it solves Dexter's immediate problem. In reality, it proves how badly he miscalculated. He thought he could manage another damaged person the way he manages crime scenes, directing her, nudging her, staying 3 steps ahead. But human unpredictability does not follow the code, and Lila is driven by obsession, not rules. Every time she helps, more innocent victims get pulled into the blast radius. The long-term effects of Lila's involvement reveal a larger pattern. Whenever Dexter lets someone glimpse his real self without offering full truth or full commitment, that person becomes a wild variable. Brian, Dokes, Lila, and later Miguel all occupy this half-known space, and each time, Dexter's plans fray at the edges until something explodes. Lila is the clearest early warning that controlled exposure is an illusion, and the next person he brings into his secret will push that illusion even further. Lila's fire closes one chapter, but the real explosion happens after the smoke clears. Dexter walks back into Miami Metro as the man who caught the Bay Harbor butcher while secretly being the butcher who got away. This is an event that changed not just his risk level, but his entire relationship to failure. Let's kick things off with Dexter's new reality post-Dokes. Externally, the plan has worked. Dokes is dead, framed as a prolific serial killer. The FBI has packed up. Lundy is gone. Inside the bullpen, Masuka and the others trade morbid jokes about the Bay Harbor butcher's precision, unknowingly praising Dexter's technique. Throughout his life, Dexter wanted to be invisible. Now, his alter ego is a legend on the evidence board, and a dead colleague carries the blame for his victims. That gap between truth and perception creates a dangerous high. Dexter has just dodged a federal task force, internal suspicion, and the one cop who truly discovered him. The lesson he takes is not caution, but confirmation. If he can improvise through the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, if Harry's code can bend enough to allow framing an innocent man and still keep him safe, then maybe the dark passenger is untouchable. This would be the start of a new, inflated confidence, where every close call feels like proof that he is chosen, not lucky. We're going to dive deep into how that survivor's high bleeds into his planning. Dexter becomes looser with kill locations, taking victims in places that brush dangerously close to his person are enormous. By the time Miguel Prado arrives, Dexter is primed to believe he can manage a volatile ally again, only better this time. His sense of invincibility will collide with more complex relationships, more intelligent adversaries, and a growing family structure that cannot survive another Bay Harbor level disaster. The next time his plan falls apart, the cost will not be a framed colleague in a file. It will be the people he claims to love most. Dexter's victory over Dokes leaves him dangerously confident, and Miguel Prado arrives as the perfect test of that arrogance. A charismatic prosecutor, a public crusader against violent criminals, and a man grieving his murdered brother, Miguel looks like the answer to Dexter's deepest problem, being alone with his dark passenger. Let's kick things off with Dexter's plan. Throughout his life, Dexter has been told by Harry that the code is the only barrier between his urges and total chaos. With Miguel, he imagines something bigger, not just a personal rulebook, but a shared creed, a powerful ally inside the legal system who hates watching guilty men walk free just as much as he does. If Harry's choice was to create one careful killer, Dexter's new vision is to franchise that model. The seduction is gradual and calculated. Dexter saves Miguel from Oscar's killer, then reveals small pieces of the truth, framing his murders as a purer form of justice that the courtroom can never reach. Miguel watches Dexter stalk a target, prepare the plastic, confront the victim with evidence, and deliver the kill. Their first shared kill, defense attorney Ethan Turner, feels like proof that Miguel can follow the code. Dexter tests him with a clearly guilty man, lays out the ritual, and sees Miguel's exhilaration as validation. This would be the start of a partnership Dexter believes he can manage. But almost immediately, the cracks show. Miguel is not Harry. Miguel is not interested in restraint. The code, to him, is not a moral boundary. It is a toolkit. He pushes to choose victims himself, argues that bad can mean personally inconvenient, and bristles whenever Dexter insists on evidence or discipline. The more power Miguel tastes, the more he treats murder as an extension of his ego and career, not a grim necessity. Then comes the pattern interrupt. Ellen Wolf, a principled defense attorney, a genuine believer in due process, and Miguel's professional enemy. When Miguel kills her, off code and on impulse, it is an event that changed Dexter's understanding of what he has unleashed. Miguel lies about it, tries to fold the murder into a narrative they can share space with a wedding ring and a crib. Let's kick things off with Dexter's vision. On the surface, it is almost wholesome. Marry Rita, become a father, show up to barbecues and parent-teacher meetings. Then, after dark, slip away and let the dark passenger handle the backlog of Miami's worst offenders. A perfect compartmentalized existence where blood slides, baby bottles, and evidence reports never touch. In Dexter's mind, this would be the start of a sustainable double life, not an event that changed his operational reality forever. The problem is that marriage and fatherhood are not background noise. They are time-intensive, emotionally demanding, and relentlessly unpredictable. We're going to dive deep into the logistics because that is where his plan really collapses. Dexter goes from late-night stalking sessions to late-night feedings, from studying victims' routines to memorizing Lamaze schedules and pediatrician appointments. He kills after baby classes and premarital counseling, then drags himself home with knife wounds and bruises he has to explain away as clumsiness or long hours at Miami Metro. The strain shows quickly. Rita notices his absences, the missed calls, the way he drifts during conversations. When Dexter crashes the car with Rita and the kids, it is not just a plot beat. It is physical evidence that his body cannot keep up with the rhythm he has designed. The accident exposes how his exhaustion, caused by nights spent hunting and dismembering, bleeds into the daytime role of fiancé and stepfather. Each lie about where he was, each improvised excuse about a cut or a late arrival, becomes another crack in the facade. Those cracks lead directly to near collapses. Dexter oversleeps and almost misses key family events. He arrives to gatherings injured, forcing Rita to question what kind of danger surrounds him. His planning grows sloppier, his exposure risk spikes, and the careful precision that once defined his kills erodes under the constant pressure of diapers, deadlines, and Miguel's unraveling alliance in the background. Psychologically, this phase is crucial. Dexter begins to believe he can be both a good father and a good killer, that the code and genuine intimacy can coexist without consequences. But intimacy demands presence. Rita's questions, Aster and Cody's needs, and the looming reality of the baby keep puncturing his carefully timed routines, dragging the truth of his double life closer to the surface. By the time Harrison is born, the domestic plan is already stretched to breaking, even if Dexter cannot see it. One more complex adversary, one more killer who mirrors his family, ties back at him, will be enough to snap the illusion that he can keep victims and loved ones. He will embed himself in Arthur's life, observing how this older killer manages the contradictions. Under the alias Kyle Butler, Dexter presents himself as a troubled man seeking guidance. He attends Arthur's church group, shares meals with his family, and follows him on his charity builds. Let's kick things off with the illusion at the heart of this. Dexter thinks he is the one in control, dissecting a fellow predator from a safe emotional distance. But the cracks are obvious from the moment Dexter steps inside the Mitchell home. The family is jumpy and overly polite. Arthur's son Jonah flinches at his father's voice. His daughter Rebecca is withdrawn, and his wife Sally is frozen in a performance of domestic happiness held together by terror. Dexter watches Arthur explode in sudden rage, hurling insults and physical intimidation at his children. The supposed model of balance is clearly an abuser whose private life is collapsing. Yet, Dexter does not abandon the plan. Instead, he experiences intense cognitive dissonance. He needs Arthur to prove that a killer can keep victims and loved ones in separate boxes forever, so he explains away the evidence in front of him. Arthur is under stress. The family is overreacting. The violence at home is treated as a flaw in an otherwise successful system, not as an event that changed how Dexter should see his own ambitions. Throughout his life, Dexter has twisted reality to protect the code. Here, he twists it to protect a fantasy. This would be the start of one of Dexter's most dangerous blind spots. By staying close, he does learn Trinity's ritual patterns and emotional triggers, but he also invites Arthur deeper into his own world. Arthur meets Dexter's coworkers, senses his secrets, and eventually discovers that Kyle Butler has a family of his own. By the time Dexter finally accepts that Arthur is not a model but a warning, the long-term effects of that denial are already locked in. His plan to study a safe mentor has placed Rita, Aster, Cody, and Harrison directly in the blast radius of a serial killer who now knows exactly where Dexter lives and what to destroy next. Arthur, knowing Dexter's home address, turns the Trinity case from a controlled hunt into a ticking clock. From this point on, every hour Dexter thinks he is managing is actually being counted down by someone else. And Dexter's attempt to schedule a perfect kill around work and family becomes the very mechanism that destroys both. Let's kick things off with Dexter's operational fantasy. In his mind, the Trinity investigation is a textbook application of Harry's code. Who was killed for decades will naturally check up on Kyle, while Dexter is juggling blood work at the station and diaper duty at home. Arthur is quietly discovering Dexter's real name, his workplace, and the existence of his family. Then come the missed chances to end the threat. Dexter has moments where Arthur is alone, vulnerable, and perfectly positioned to be killed according to the code. But a call from Deborah about the Trinity Task Force, or Rita demanding he come home immediately, forces him to postpone. Each delay is framed as responsible choice. Protect the cover, keep the family calm, avoid Miami Metro suspicion. In practice, every postponement hands Arthur more time to study his hunter. Here is the core problem. Dexter designs plans as if time itself is obedient, as if victims, colleagues, and loved ones will freeze in place while he performs his ritual. Trinity exposes that real life does not pause for a serial killer's schedule. The long-term effects of this illusion are catastrophic. By repeatedly choosing to reschedule, to partially execute, to do it tomorrow, Dexter creates the perfect opening for Arthur to step around the code and strike directly at Rita and Harrison. This would be the start of Dexter learning that the deadliest variable in any hunt is not the target, but the calendar he thinks he controls. That illusion finally detonates in the most brutal way possible. Dexter does what he always does. He finishes the hunt, closes the case in his mind, and assumes the danger has been contained. But with Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity killer, that belief doesn't just collapse a plan. It destroys a family. Let's kick things off with the sequence itself, because the order matters. Dexter tracks Arthur, sabotages his car, and corners him in that final confrontation. He delivers the kill, believing he has outplayed a veteran predator who has been killing for decades. In Dexter's head, this is the victorious end of a long pursuit. The threat is neutralized. The code is satisfied. Now it is time for a normal night with Rita and Harrison. Except when Dexter walks into his home, the fantasy shatters. Harrison is crying on the bathroom floor, sitting in a pool of blood. Rita is dead in the bathtub, her femoral artery cut, staged as a horrific mirror of Dexter's own childhood trauma. In one shot, the series fuses past and present. Another child, another mother, another life, rewritten by a killer's ritual. From here, we're going to dive deep backward through the chain of choices that made this possible. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated delay as a strategy. One more day to gather evidence, one more opportunity to observe the pattern. With Trinity, every postponement is fatal, and late-night rituals. The kill room has followed Dexter home. The long-term effects of this moment echo through every later season. Harrison's trauma, Deborah's guilt, Dexter's increasing emotional detachment. From this point on, there is no real going back. Every plan Dexter makes is haunted by that image of Harrison in blood. Even when he refuses to fully accept the lesson, he keeps hunting, keeps invoking Harry, keeps refining the code. But the audience has discovered the truth. The next time Dexter claims he can manage both family and murder, that promise already feels broken. And as later relationships form and fracture, this ghost will be waiting in the background, ready to tear apart the next carefully constructed life Dexter tries to build. Rita's murder is an event that changed everything about Dexter's confidence in his own design. The carefully managed double life collapses in one bloody bathtub, and season 5 opens not with a master planner, but with a man wandering through grief, guilt, and shock, barely able to hear Harry's voice over the noise. Post-Rita, Dexter is destabilized. The code feels less like a guiding system and more like a hollow ritual he failed to uphold. He blames his urges, blames his choice to keep killing, and for the first time, the narration admits that maybe the dark passenger cannot be contained without collateral damage. This is the version of Dexter who punches a random man at a gas station, who abandons his children to flee on a boat, who kills in a bathroom without preparation. The meticulous hunter is replaced by someone improvising just to feel anything other than loss. Into this emotional wreckage, Lumen enters. She is not a project like Miguel or a lover like Lila. She is a kidnapped victim Dexter discovers while cleaning up one of his own kills, a living witness to both her abusers and his ritual. When she sees the plastic, the knives, and the body, she does not run from the truth. She locks eyes with Dexter's darkness and stays. Throughout his life, Dexter believed that anyone who discovered his secret had to die or be destroyed. Lumen becomes the exception. Their partnership is not born from the code. It is born from trauma. Together, they improvise a mission. Track down the men who raped and tortured Lumen, kill them one by one, and in the process, give her justice while Dexter performs penance for Rita. The list of victims, the stakeouts, the warehouse kills, all feel less like calculated hunts and more like therapy sessions conducted with knives. Dexter even lets Lumen on the kill tables, guiding her hands as she delivers the fatal blows. But strikingly, and the next discovery will not be so easily buried. Because the next partner will not leave so cleanly, and the next discovery will not be so easily buried. Nowhere is that more obvious than with Jordan Chase, the first target who doesn't just react to Dexter's plan, but actively controls the narrative around it. Let's kick things off with who Chase is in Dexter's world. He isn't a lone predator hiding in the shadows. He's a self-help celebrity, a charismatic guru with stadium crowds, a best-selling brand, and a loyal inner circle willing to kill to protect him. Throughout his life, Dexter has preferred isolated monsters, one table, one body, one secret. Jordan represents the opposite. Taking him down means challenging a public persona, a media machine, and a group dynamic that makes the usual one-on-one kill structure almost impossible. So, Dexter and Lumen build a new plan. They infiltrate Chase's circle through Lumen's trauma, using her status as a former victim to get closer to the men who hurt her. The goal is meticulous. Identify every member of the group, document their crimes, and then isolate Jordan as the final kill, the head of the snake that, once removed, will end the threat cleanly. On paper, it looks like an evolution of Harry's Code, a way to honor the rules while addressing a network of abusers rather than a single target. Then Jordan flips the script. He discovers Lumen, recognizes her as the survivor who escaped, and turns that knowledge into leverage. Instead of hiding, he leans into his public image. He keeps touring, keeps smiling, and uses his resources to stay one step ahead. Security teams, private locations, controlled appearances. Every layer forces Dexter into riskier moves, breaking the illusion that the dark passenger is operating from a place of total control. Here's the pattern. Interrupt. For once, Dexter isn't just hunting a killer. He's fighting a brand manager. Chase understands perception. He manipulates conversations, gaslights Lumen, and frames any emerging suspicion as the ravings of unstable accusers. The truth is locked behind charisma and money, and Dexter's usual forensic precision suddenly looks clumsy against a man who can rewrite reality in real time. The near failures pile up. Quinn's quiet investigation into Dexter, sparked by surveillance photos of him with Lumen, converges with Deb's manhunt for the Barrel Girl vigilantes. Every move Dexter makes to protect Lumen risks exposing her as an avenger, and him as something far worse. The operation becomes a tightrope. One misstep, and Miami Metro discovers not just a rape murder ring, but the Bay Harbor butcher hiding in plain sight. By the time Quinn's curiosity about the Bay Harbor butcher, and we get a detective willing to poke at the one myth that keeps Dexter safe, that Dokes was the real monster, and the case is closed. This would be the start of a different kind of threat. Quinn is not Dokes, driven by raw instinct and rage. He is methodical, financially desperate, and open to help from someone even shadier. Enter Stan Liddy. A disgraced ex-cop with a taste for off-the-book surveillance, Liddy gives Quinn exactly what Miami Metro usually lacks when it comes to Dexter: focused attention. The plan they form is simple but devastating. Watch Dexter. Record Dexter. Catch him slipping where the code cannot protect him. Liddy's van becomes a mobile confession booth. Hidden cameras track Dexter and Lumen loading plastic-wrapped bodies onto a boat. Audio captures tense, incriminating conversations that turn vague suspicions into near proof. For once, Dexter's careful separation between his day job and his kills starts to collapse on video, frame by frame. The irony is brutal. Dexter's entire life is built on understanding blood, trace evidence, and how cases are made. That expertise becomes a double-edged sword when Liddy's recordings and potential blood traces threaten to turn his own methods against him. If those bodies are found, if even a single drop connects back to Dexter's boat or his tools, the forensic shield he has trusted for years will become the roadmap to his victims. Then the plan implodes. Dexter kills Liddy in the van, another improvised act to protect the secret. But the timing is terrible. Quinn's phone records, his link to Liddy, and the blood at the scene pull him into the investigation as a possible murderer. Suddenly, the cop who almost exposed Dexter is facing charges Dexter deserves. Here, Dexter performs one of his most chilling manipulations. He handles the blood evidence on Quinn's shoes and quietly alters the result, clearing Quinn and erasing the last trace of Liddy's work. The entire threat evaporates, not because Dexter outsmarted some genius adversary, but because he controlled the lab. The lesson is clear, even if Dexter refuses to absorb it. Colleagues with partial information, wounded pride, or financial motives can nearly topple his life without ever fully discovering the truth. The code cannot anticipate every casual betrayal or off-duty investigation, and the consequences of that blind spot will only grow as more people at Miami Metro start to connect patterns Quinn never gets to follow through. If Quinn was a warning about casual suspicion, Season 6 is what happens when Dexter misreads an entire worldview. The Doomsday Killer case doesn't just threaten his freedom, it exposes a spiritual blind spot that passenger is rational, almost clinical, and that fanaticism is just an aesthetic choice his victims use to justify their own violence. This would be the start of a major miscalculation. Dexter underestimates how belief can override self-preservation, fear, and even basic predictability. He misreads Travis's relationship with Geller completely, clinging to the idea of a dominant mastermind directing a weaker follower. When it is finally discovered that Geller has been dead for some time and exists only as a projection in Travis's mind, Dexter's entire profile collapses. His plan depended on manipulating a hierarchy that did not exist. The consequences are immediate and brutal. Dexter walks into ambushes because he assumes Travis will act like a cautious serial killer, not a prophet racing a clock to trigger revelation. He is drugged, kidnapped, and strapped to a table in an abandoned church, forced into an attempted conversion, as Travis tries to frame him as the final sacrificial beast. Dexter's near-death experiences in this season are not just tactical errors. They are the direct result of failing to grasp how apocalyptic belief can justify any escalation. His focus drifts from operational security toward his own internal questions about faith, Harry, and whether his dark passenger is a kind of demon he has been worshiping without admitting it. Throughout his life, Dexter used the code as a substitute religion. Season 6 confronts him with a distorted mirror of that faith, and it shakes his concentration at the worst possible time. While he is chasing visions of meaning in a church, Deb is in therapy, unpacking her attachment to Dexter, reevaluating Harry's choices, and being pushed to examine patterns she has ignored for years. As Dexter's world becomes more philosophically unstable, Deb's world becomes sharper, more analytical, and less willing to accept comforting illusions. The long-term effects of this collision between belief and denial will be devastating. The doomsday killer nearly ends Dexter's life. Deb's next discovery will end the life he thinks he can still protect. The doomsday case forces Deb to confront Dexter's capacity for violence. Brother Sam forces Dexter to confront something even more destabilizing, the possibility that he never had to be this way at all. Let's kick things off with Dexter's attraction to Brother Sam. Throughout his life, every authority figure who discovered his urges has done one of two things: try to cage them or try to use them. Harry built a code. Miguel tried to weaponize Dexter. Lumen mirrored his trauma. Brother Sam is different. A former gang comes the pattern. Interrupt. Nick laughs about Sam's death. In that instant, Dexter's experiment with redemption ends. He drags Nick into the ocean and drowns him, embracing the dark passenger with a renewed, almost relieved intensity. The tentative roadmap out of killing dissolves, not because it failed, but because Dexter chose the familiar satisfaction of control over the frightening uncertainty of change. The psychological fallout is subtle but devastating. Dexter now carries a ready-made excuse. He tried to change. Brother Sam showed him another path, and Dexter can tell himself that path simply did not work. That narrative becomes a shield whenever consequences mount. From innocent victims around the Bay Harbor butcher investigation to Deb's eventual breakdown. Every time the cost rises, Dexter can retreat into the belief that this is the only way he can exist. The long-term effects of rejecting Brother Sam ripple far beyond that single kill. By turning away from real transformation, Dexter locks himself into a future where every escape plan is built on denial, not growth. Running away with Hannah, abandoning Miami in a hurricane, disappearing into Iron Lake as Jim Lindsay. Each new life is just a geographical reset of the same internal system Harry helped build. And because Dexter never truly changes, the people who discover his truth later are not meeting a redeemed man with a haunted past. They are walking directly into a pattern that was tested with Brother Sam, then consciously abandoned. If Brother Sam was Dexter trying to bolt morality onto the code from the outside, Deborah's therapy is where that whole structure begins to rot from the inside. The hurricane reset failed. Now the pressure is coming from the one person Harry never planned for. A sister who starts asking the right questions about her own life. Let's kick things off with Deb's state of mind when she first walks into therapy. Throughout his life, Dexter has relied on Deb seeing herself as broken, traumatized from the ice truck killer, from Brian nearly killing her, from Dokes, from Lundy, from Rita's murder. Each case leaves Deb with more panic attacks, more failed relationships, and a deeper conviction that she is the common problem. Dexter quietly encourages that narrative, because as long as Deb blames herself, she never fully examines him. Therapy becomes an event that changed the narrative rules. For the first time, Deb has a structured space to say out loud what the show has hinted at for seasons, that something about Dexter does not add up emotionally. In sessions, she talks about his calm at crime scenes, his absence of grief, his way of being there without ever really being there. Deb, who always saw herself as a magnet for chaos, suddenly recognizes that Dexter is the common denominator in multiple catastrophic events. Dexter's miscalculation is subtle but fatal. He believes his emotional distance is camouflage, a harmless quirk that keeps the dark passenger hidden. In therapy, that distance stops looking like stoicism and starts looking like pathology. The very trait Harry trained him to perfect becomes a glaring anomaly under Deb's introspective gaze. The code never accounted for a loved one doing this level of psychological autopsy. This would be the start of a collision course. Deb's path of self-discovery is now pointed directly at Dexter's secrets, and no tactical planning can outmaneuver her emotional truth. As our sessions continue, each new insight strips away another layer of the life Dexter thought he controlled, pushing both of them toward a moment where denial is no longer an option. Those therapy sessions with Deb are all about language, memory, and denial. In the abandoned church, that denial is about to be ripped away in a single, unbroken image. Let's kick things off with the scene. Dexter believes he controls more than any other. The church is dark, isolated, and drenched in symbolism. Plastic sheeting covers the floor and walls, like a sanctified version of every kill room he has ever built. Travis Marshall is strapped to the table, framed by stained glass and religious iconography, a final doomsday tableau that Dexter thinks he is rewriting on his own terms. The knives are laid out, the slides are ready. This is his ritual, at its most familiar, the place where the dark passenger usually feels safest. Throughout his life, Dexter has relied on a few key assumptions to keep that ritual intact. The first is geography. Kill in controlled, hidden spaces, and the world stays out. The second is timing. Strike when everyone, especially Deb, is occupied elsewhere. Here, both assumptions seem locked in. Miami Metro believes Travis is still at large. Deb is consumed with the manhunt and the emotional fallout of her therapy revelations. The church is off the grid, a crime scene already written off as part of Travis's apocalyptic theater. Dexter is convinced this kill will tie off the doomsday case neatly, with no personal consequences. Then the pattern breaks. The intrusion does not come from a stray witness, a patrol car, or a security camera. It comes from the one person the code never prepared him for. Deb pushes open the church doors. Her voice echoes as she calls Dexter's name, expecting to find a brother. Maybe are exposed to the one person whose opinion matters most. From this moment on, every choice either of them makes is contaminated by that image. The long-term effects of Deb walking into that church will echo through every case, every argument, every attempt at redemption. And the real question becomes, once someone has discovered Dexter like this, is there any version of their lives that can survive it? Deb walking into that church isn't just an event that changed their relationship. It instantly forces Dexter into crisis management mode. The kill is over. The cover story begins. And from the very first sentence out of his mouth, the damage control is already failing. Let's kick things off with Dexter's immediate strategy. He does what he has always done when the truth leaks out: minimize, rationalize, reframe. In the church, he insists Travis Marshall was a monster, that this was a one-time necessity, an emergency execution that the system could never handle. He leans on the language of justice and public safety, trying to fold a ritualistic kill into the logic of police work. If Travis is framed as just another dangerous suspect, then Dexter is just a detective who went too far. But throughout his life, whenever Dexter calls something a one-time exception, it is actually a template. Very quickly, the short-term lie grows into a longer-term plan. Bring Deb into the code. He starts explaining Harry's rules, the dark passenger, the idea that his urges can be contained and directed at guilty victims. The pitch is clear. If she can accept that Harry managed him, maybe she can too. This would be the start of a new arrangement where killing is recast as an extension of his job instead of a secret life that has to end. Here we get a crucial pattern: interrupt. Up to now, the people who discovered Dexter either embraced his darkness too easily, like Lila and Miguel, or tried to expose him and died, like Dokes. Deb does neither. She recoils. Her first instinct is not complicity, but intervention. She drags Dexter toward therapy, urges him to stop killing entirely, and tries to impose abstinence where Harry imposed a code. That resistance is what shatters his control. Dexter believes exposure plus explanation will lead to acceptance. Deb's moral revulsion breaks that formula. Every time he presents another justification, she counters with a boundary. When he talks about only killing the guilty, she points to the bodies that followed Miguel Prado, to the chaos that always trails his choices. When he leans on childhood trauma, she refuses to let trauma erase consequences. The deeper problem is that Dexter, the moment his code outsmarted the entire justice system. Instead, it becomes an event that changed everything when one tiny piece of evidence refuses to stay buried. Let's kick things off with the inciting incident. At a routine crime scene in Season 7, La Guerta notices a familiar object on the ground, a single blood slide, prepped and labeled in the exact style used to convict Dokes as the Bay Harbor Butcher. For everyone else, it is an anomaly. For La Guerta, who never fully accepted Dokes as a sadistic killer, it is a shock that blows open an old wound. Either the real Bay Harbor Butcher is still active, or the original investigation was built on a lie. From that moment, La Guerta does what Dexter never planned for. She treats the closed case as a living puzzle. Quietly, methodically, she starts to re-examine the old evidence. She pulls the dump site maps, cross-references victim profiles, and looks for patterns that were once praised as brilliant forensic work, but now read as a single mind curating its own legend. Throughout his life, Dexter relied on those patterns as protection. Now they become a trail. La Guerta's plan is simple on the surface, but devastating in its implications. She tests the theory that someone inside Miami Metro framed Dokes, starting with the only people who had access to the evidence: the forensic blood analyst who found the slides, the colleagues who signed off on reports, the supervisors who closed the file. She pulls Dokes' personnel history, his conflicts, his obsession with Dexter. Then she asks a dangerous question. If Dokes was right about Dexter, what would that say about everyone who cleared Dexter and condemned Dokes? Dexter's first reaction is pure overconfidence. He assumes La Guerta's suspicion is manageable, a political move, or a grief response rather than a real threat. In his mind, the Bay Harbor Butcher cover story is airtight. The cabin explosion, the planted slides, the narrative of a violent sergeant driven over the edge. The code worked once. Why wouldn't it hold forever? This would be the start of his most fatal misread. Pressure mounts as LaGuerta refuses to let the pattern go. She notices that the Bay Harbor dump sites line up with areas Dexter's boat could easily reach. She questions why his usage logs never quite match his stories. She quietly brings Tom Matthews into the loop, leveraging his old-school loyalty and institutional power to access sealed files and internal records Dexter never imagined anyone would reopen. By the time Dexter realizes what is happening, his greatest success behind his calm voice. Throughout his life, very few people have looked at Dexter and seen both a killer and a potential partner. Hannah does that almost instantly. This would be the start of Dexter's most radical plan yet. Instead of hiding his life, he experiments with sharing it. He takes Hannah to a kill room. He lets her watch him prepare a victim. He admits the truth about the code, about Harry, about why he kills. In return, Hannah confesses her own victims and motivations, not as excuses, but as intimate disclosures. Dexter begins to imagine a future where there are no lies, where his dark passenger does not need to be concealed behind Rita-like normalcy, but can coexist with love, domestic routines, and a partner who already knows what he is. However, that fantasy collides with reality the moment Hannah's methods reveal their cracks. She poisons people instead of following a meticulous ritual. She leaves emotional motives unresolved, especially with old crimes tied to Wayne Randall. The tension explodes when Deborah, now carrying the weight of having discovered Dexter mid-kill, becomes a direct obstacle. Hannah responds not with negotiation, but with poison, putting Deb in the hospital. Dexter's structured code, built on rules and evidence, clashes violently with Hannah's more impulsive, self-protective choices. The legal and moral fallout is immediate. Deb is determined to take Hannah down, not just as a criminal, but as a threat to the last fragile boundary between her brother's family life and his killing life. Dexter finds himself forging evidence against someone he also wants to protect, torn between the woman who shares his darkness and the sister who has carried his secret. The long-term effects of that choice are brutal. Once Dexter tampers with Hannah's case, any illusion of a clean separation between justice, romance, and murder collapses. By the time Hannah escapes custody and later reappears as a proposed escape route from Miami, Dexter's dream has curdled into a dangerous temptation. The plan to run away with her, to abandon Miami Metro and the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, grows directly out of this failed attempt at shared darkness. What happens when that plan collides with Deb's trauma and LaGuerta's investigation? At the same time, will not just destabilize Dexter's life, it will redefine his endgame and push him toward an even more catastrophic decision that no code can justify. That collision arrives in the form of an impossible triangle: Dexter, Deb, and Hannah. 3 people connected by love, trauma, and the urge to control the narrative of what justice looks like. Deb is the person who loves him as family and demands the code, the line that separates killing the guilty from becoming the monsters they hunt. Dexter's plan is to somehow keep both, to craft a life where Deb's morality and Hannah's complicity can coexist without destroying each other. That fantasy collapses in a series of confrontations. Deb's car crash after being poisoned is an event that changed the dynamic forever. She suspects Hannah, loses control on the road, and ends up in the hospital, forcing Dexter to confront the fact that his lover just tried to kill his sister. He responds by betraying Hannah on her own terms, secretly collecting evidence and turning her in, even as they share intimate moments and talk about a future together. The emotional fallout is brutal. Hannah realizes that someone who shares her darkness has chosen Deb's law over her love, and Dexter feels the fracture of that choice immediately. The failure here is structural. Dexter believes he can mediate between absolute opposition: Deb's need to see Hannah punished and Hannah's expectation of unconditional loyalty. His attempt to split the difference only alienates both women at different points. Deb feels secondary to the dark passenger. Hannah feels expendable to the code. This would be the start of a long-term pattern where every compromise Dexter makes to have it all becomes the very reason he loses everything. As this triangle implodes, it reinforces the larger theme running through Dexter's life. Every time he tries to balance family and killing, honesty and secrecy, his plans rip the people he loves apart. The triangle with Deb and Hannah is not an exception. It is the clearest proof that Dexter's control is an illusion that cannot survive contact with real human consequences. That illusion finally shatters on a single night. New Year's Eve, in a shipping yard, with a gun in Dexter's hand and no way to talk his way out. From dogs tracking Dexter to the Everglades to Deborah witnessing Dexter plunge his knife into Travis Marshall. Every exposure has been dangerous, but La Guerta's last operation is engineered to be fatal to his double life. Let's kick things off with La Guerta's strategy. After reopening the Bay Harbor butcher case, she does what no one else at Miami Metro manages to do. She treats Dexter's old patterns as a roadmap, not a coincidence. She pulls Hector Estrada's file, the man who helped kill Dexter's mother, and quietly arranges his release. Then she builds a staged crime scene and surveillance net around him, hoping Dexter's dark passenger will do the rest. The plan is simple and brutal. Put one of Dexter's original victims in play. Watch him stalk and catch him mid-kill, recreating the all three stand in the echo of Dexter's origin as a killer. This is where we're going to dive deep into how completely his control collapses. Dexter thought he could engineer a scenario where La Guerta appeared reckless, framing him without evidence so that Miami Metro would turn on her. Instead, the reality is undeniable. She has caught him with a potential victim at a clandestine scene holding a weapon. The long-term effects of every earlier compromise land in that moment. Harry's code, the cover-ups, Deb's earlier decision to shield him after Travis Marshall. La Guerta demands Deb arrest Dexter. Dexter begs Deb to kill La Guerta. The trap forces an impossible choice that no code can sanitize. Deb pulls the trigger on La Guerta, killing an innocent woman to save her brother. This is not just another body on Dexter's table. It is an event that changed Deb's soul permanently. His failed plan does not only cost La Guerta her life, it drags Deb fully into his darkness, proving that by the end of Miami, the people trying to protect Dexter become the final, irrevocable victims of his need to keep killing. La Guerta dies on that ship, but the person who really disappears is Deborah Morgan. In the aftermath, we're going to dive deep into what it means when a plan doesn't just fail tactically, it fails spiritually. shattering the one person Dexter was always trying to protect. Deb's state after killing Lagerta is not just guilt. It is annihilation of identity. As a detective, she spent her entire career chasing killers, trusting procedure, believing in the badge as a moral anchor. Pulling the trigger to save Dexter turns all of that inside out. She drinks, she chain smokes, she drives around with Lagerta's blood on her conscience, replaying that warehouse choice. The cop who once threw herself into cases with manic energy now can barely drag herself through a shift because every arrest feels hypocritical. How can she hunt killers after becoming an accessory to the Bay Harbor butcher? Dexter's response is to create a new plan. Fix Deb like she is another crime scene. Let's kick things off with his basic assumption. Throughout his life, when chaos hit, Dexter relied on Harry's code and ritual to regain control. So he tries the same with Deb. He drags her into cases, asks for help with investigations, pretends that the old partnership can be rebooted. He minimizes the gravity of Lagerta's death, framing it as an ugly but necessary choice to protect their family and keep his dark passenger from being exposed. But Deb's downward spiral refuses to fit into that narrative. She quits Miami Metro. Long-term effects of Lagerta's death are baked into every decision Dexter makes. Deb's brokenness becomes his constant, unspoken calculation. How far can he keep killing before she finally breaks for good? That question will hang over Hannah, Vogel, Saxon, and the hurricane itself. Because this would be the start of a tragic endgame, where Deb's fate is not just collateral damage, but the final, brutal consequence of all his failed plans. And when that end finally arrives, it will answer the darkest question Lagerta's death ever raised. Lagerta's death leaves Dexter standing in the dark, convinced the code is all he has left. But then a new voice arrives, claiming that even the code is not really his. Dr. Evelyn Vogel walks into Miami Metro and calmly announces that Dexter Morgan is not just a killer with rules. He is her work. Let's kick things off with Vogel's central claim. She tells Dexter she worked with Harry, that she profiled psychopaths for a living, and that together they designed the code as a treatment plan for his killing urges. Not a father's desperate improvisation, but a clinical experiment on a traumatized child. Throughout his life, Dexter believed Harry alone discovered the dark passenger and built a moral framework from guilt and love. Vogel rewrites that origin story in a few conversations, calling Dexter her perfect success and smiling as if his entire life as a careful killer were a published case study. At first, Dexter turns this revelation into a plan. After Lagerta, his sense of purpose is cracked, his justification shaken. Vogel offers something intoxicating: expert validation. If Harry and Vogel engineered the code, then maybe Dexter is not just a monster improvising in the dark, but the endpoint of cutting-edge neuroscience. He decides to use Vogel's insight to understand himself better, to refine his methods, maybe even to find a new mission by hunting the mysterious brain surgeon who is sending her grisly trophies. This would be the start of a different kind of exposure, not to the law, but to the truth about his own origin. The pattern interrupt comes when Dexter discovers Vogel's secret files, video of young Dexter in sessions, notes about his reactions, diagrams of his brain, and the code like a lab protocol. The moral system he clung to as proof he could be more than his victims suddenly looks like a behavioral cage built by two adults who saw him as a fascinating problem to manage. Vogel's manipulations deepen that unease. She withholds information about the brain surgeon, nudges Dexter toward certain kills, and frames his choice as inevitable, telling him he is not designed for normal life. Each conversation chips away, meets its harshest test with the brain surgeon, a killer who doesn't just challenge the code, but exposes how badly Dexter misreads other people's families. Let's kick things off with who the brain surgeon actually is in this dynamic. On the surface, he's a meticulous murderer, leaving pieces of victims' brains as trophies, a new predator in Miami that seems drawn to Vogel's work on psychopaths. Very quickly, though, the pattern tightens. The killer knows her terminology, mirrors her case studies, and taunts her with videos and packages that prove an intimate understanding of her past. This is not a random adversary. This is a living critique of her entire project, including Dexter. Dexter's plan responds to that threat in the only way he knows. Protect the mentor, hunt the predator, neutralize the problem before it reaches his own life. He moves Vogel into his orbit, installs surveillance, and starts working through her history of patients, convinced that somewhere in those files lies the truth. Throughout his life, whenever a killer appeared with a personal connection, Dexter treated it as a puzzle to be solved by pattern recognition and the knife. The brain surgeon is no exception. He believes that if he can map Vogel's past, he can control her future. But the family twist shatters that illusion. The revelation that Vogel's supposedly dead son, Daniel Vogel, is alive, operating under the name Oliver Saxon, collapses the neat boundary between doctor and subject. The brain surgeon is not just a patient. He is her child, raised in the shadow of her theories, shaped by the same clinical detachment she once used on Dexter. This would be the start of a new kind of blindness for Dexter, because he keeps trying to read Saxon as a case file, while Vogel is seeing him as the boy she failed. Key failures cascade from that misread. Dexter underestimates Saxon's access, believing cameras and careful tracking will keep Vogel safe, while Saxon walks freely through her routines and emotions. Dexter fails to anticipate her vulnerability to guilt and maternal hope, assuming she will follow the code of self-preservation rather than the pull of reconciliation. He misjudges when to intervene, hesitating when she asks for more time, trusting that his plan can stretch around her needs. The consequences are brutal. Saxon abducts Vogel, and in a quiet domestic setting that looks almost ordinary, Dexter discovers them just in time to watch her throat open in front of him. Another architect of his life dies as a direct result of his overconfidence, an event that changed the trajectory of his final season. Vogel's murder proves to make that happen. Dexter goes back to something he understands: logistics, fake passports, burner phones, cash, and carefully chosen departure times. He studies Miami Metro's focus on Oliver Saxon, using the man who murdered Vogel as a kind of smokescreen. While everyone else is chasing the brain surgeon, Dexter plans to slip away through the airport with Hannah and Harrison, timing their exit so that no one notices they are gone until it is too late. On paper, it looks meticulous, another perfect plan. But Miami is not just a city. It is a web of obligations. Deborah has finally stepped away from Miami Metro, then been pulled back in, trying to rebuild a career that Dexter's secrets helped destroy. Saxon is still active, still hunting, and his connection to Vogel ties directly back to Dexter's own investigation. On top of that, U.S. Marshals are tracking Hannah, turning every public space into a surveillance zone. Disappearing as a single adult is difficult. Disappearing as a known associate of a wanted poisoner while traveling with a small child is almost impossible. Dexter's blind spot is believing that geography can erase consequences. He acts as if LaGuerta's murder in the shipping container, Rita's death in the bathtub, and Deborah's trauma will all lose their power once he crosses an ocean. Throughout his life, the code has given him a narrative. Kill the right victims, follow the rules, and the damage can be contained. Argentina becomes the latest version of that narrative, a place where the truth about what he has done will somehow not matter. Of course, the real collision is not with law enforcement. It is with the people who have already discovered who Dexter truly is. Deborah's loyalty, Hannah's faith, Harrison's innocence, all stand in the path of his escape. The plan will not be shattered by a badge or a warrant, but by the final personal cost of every choice he has made. And when that cost arrives, it will hit Dexter in a way no arrest ever could. That final cost arrives in the form of Oliver Saxon. And the tragedy is that Dexter recognizes him not just as another predator, but as a mirror of what he might have become without Harry's code. Saxon is Dr. Vogel's estranged son, a calculated killer who enjoys recording his victims, studying their fear, and turning intimacy into a weapon. He doesn't just threaten Miami, he targets the fragile new equilibrium Dexter has built with Deborah, Vogel, and the hope of a life beyond killing. Let's kick things off with the plan Dexter believes will prove he has finally changed. After seasons of relying on the knife and the table, he decides Saxon will be different. No kill room, no accelerates. Saxon infiltrates the building, kills a responding officer, and turns the supposed safe space into another hunting ground. By the time Deb's post-surgery complication leaves her in a vegetative state, the long-term effects of Dexter's choice are undeniable. His refusal to kill Saxon when he had the chance has cost Deborah her future. This leads to one of Dexter's clearest moral crossroads. He finally helps bring Saxon into custody, seemingly completing his experiment. Cameras, paperwork, the full weight of the system surround them. Then Saxon taunts him about Deb. In that instant, the entire plan disintegrates. Dexter walks into the interrogation room, pretends to be drawing blood, and drives a pen into Saxon's neck, watching him bleed out on the floor. The man who wanted to prove he could let the system work abandons it in a pure rush of rage and grief. In the larger arc of Dexter's life, Saxon proves that even when Dexter tries to change his methods, the destination stays the same. The dark passenger still chooses who lives and who dies, and someone he loves still pays the price. This would be the start of Dexter finally admitting that the problem is not only the victims he selects, but the entire belief that he can control the consequences at all. From a distance, Dexter's final season looks like a slow unraveling. But in the hospital with Deborah Morgan, that unraveling stops being theoretical and becomes a body on a ventilator. This is where Dexter's fantasy of control, of managing the dark passenger without destroying his family, collides with an outcome he can never spin into anything noble. Let's kick things off with the brutal sequence of events. Deb survives the gunshot and makes it through surgery. For a brief moment, the narrative pretends there might be a happy ending. Then a blood clot triggers a stroke, cutting off oxygen to her brain. By the time Dexter reaches her, the doctors explain that Deb is in a vegetative state with no meaningful chance of recovery. Every word in that conversation quietly points back to him. Saxon only targeted Deb because Dexter brought him into their lives. Dexter only brought him in because the code demanded another kill. The long-term effects of every earlier compromise are now concentrated in one hospital bed. Throughout his life, Dexter told himself the code kept his loved ones safe. Here, he finally discovers that the opposite is true. Deb's condition is not a random tragedy. It is an event that changed from a single choice at the airport to let Saxon live a little longer, to a chain reaction that ends with her brain function erased. The perfect predator has created the perfect victim, someone innocent, incapacitated, and completely unable to consent to what happens next. Dexter's decision in that his presence has poisoned her entire life. Harry's code promised that killing the guilty would protect the innocent. Deb proves that the code has only expanded the blast radius. By the time her body sinks beneath the waves, Dexter's original plan is gone. There is no family left to protect, no sister to deceive, no moral justification that can make this outcome acceptable. What is a vigilante without a cause, or a code without anyone left to save? The answer to that question is what the series forces him to confront next. By the time Deborah's body is gone, Dexter has run out of justifications. The code has failed, the family is destroyed, and the Bay Harbor Butcher is standing in the ruins he created. So his final plan is not to kill another target, but to erase himself. Let's kick things off with the setup the show gives this decision. A massive hurricane bears down on Miami. Hospitals are being evacuated, and Dexter quietly moves through the chaos with Saxon in custody and Deborah brain dead. After pulling Saxon's kill in front of the cameras and engineering an officer-involved shooting, Dexter walks into Deborah's room, turns off her life support, and wheels her body to his boat. While Hannah and Harrison board a plane for Argentina, Dexter sails straight toward the storm, leaving a final call that makes it sound like he will die at sea. The debris that washes up later confirms what everyone believes. Dexter Morgan has vanished into the hurricane. Throughout his life, Dexter has framed his choices as necessary sacrifices. This last one is no different. He tells himself that everyone is safer without him, that his presence is inherently toxic, that the dark passenger will always drag his victims into the blast radius. In his mind, disappearing is an act of twisted responsibility, a way to honor Deborah by making sure no one else shares her fate. The hurricane becomes a symbolic execution chamber, a natural force that can do what Harry's code, Miami Metro, and even Dexter's own willpower never managed to accomplish: end the Bay Harbor Butcher. But when we're going to dive deep into this sacrifice, the flaws become impossible to ignore. Dexter does not just remove himself from Harrison's life. He abandons his son to grow up with another killer. Hannah may have affection and genuine care, but she is a poisoner who has already murdered multiple people and evaded justice. The boy Dexter claims to protect is now being raised by someone who lives outside the law, with no honest explanation of what really happened to his father. At the same time, Miami Metro is left with a trail of unanswered questions. And that storm eventually comes back to the surface. Dexter's hurricane escape was supposed to erase the past, but Iron Lake shows what really happened when that buried life floated back up. Instead of a reborn man, we discover a fugitive in self-imposed exile, clinging to a fantasy of control that is already cracking. Let's kick things off with the surface illusion. In Iron Lake, Dexter has become Jim Lindsay, a quiet employee at a wilderness and hunting store in a tiny upstate New York town. He lives alone in a remote cabin. No family, no real friends, just a routine of work, running in the snow, and feeding a pet goat. For nearly a decade, he has not killed anyone. On paper, this would be the start of a redemption arc. The Bay Harbor butcher gone, replaced by a man who sells rifles instead of using them on victims. But the way he maintains that abstinence tells a different story. Jim's life is aggressively minimal. No romantic attachments, no deep conversations, no late nights out. He avoids alcohol-fueled parties, avoids conflict, and even avoids being alone with potential targets. Every day is the same loop, a rigid sequence designed to keep the dark passenger asleep. Throughout his life, Dexter tried to manage his urges with Harry's code. In Iron Lake, he replaces the code with distance. If Miami was about rules, Iron Lake is about absence. Underneath, though, the urges have not gone anywhere. The most obvious crack is Deb. Dead in Miami, she now lives on as a constant hallucinated companion, arguing with him at the breakfast table, in the truck, in the woods. She is the new Harry voice, but harsher, embodying guilt instead of guidance. Her presence proves that Dexter has not processed his grief or his crimes. He has just externalized them into a running monologue. Then there is the way his mind still tracks prey. Working at the store, he notes customer behavior, weapon choices, hunting patterns. Out in the snow, he follows animal tracks with the same focus he once used on human targets. The camera lingers on his face as he imagines blood on the white landscape. The dark passenger is not gone. It is pacing behind glass. The pattern interrupt comes with Matt Caldwell, a rich local who brags about a past boating accident that killed innocent people. Matt crashes through Dexter's carefully built neutrality. When Matt recklessly wounds a deer, laughs about it, and tries to cover it up, Dexter's restraint finally breaks. In the kill cabin that was never supposed to exist again, he murders Matt, ending nearly 10 years of abstinence in a single, furious choice. This is the core failure of the Iron Lake plan. Dexter treated killing like a bad habit that could be starved out by willpower of Rita's murder and the abandonment that followed. What walks into Iron Lake is not just a son seeking his father, but a living consequence of Dexter's choice to fake his death and vanish into the storm. Dexter responds the only way he knows how, with a plan. The new strategy is to reconnect with Harrison as Jim Lindsay first, then slowly guide him toward the truth. He imagines a careful, incremental reveal where the boy learns about Harry's code, understands the dark passenger as a kind of inherited urge, and is gently steered away from killing. In Dexter's mind, this would be the start of a redemptive arc, the one time he might break the pattern of protégés who end up dead or corrupted. But from the beginning, the emotional reality refuses to fit that script. Harrison is angry, sharp, and already showing violent impulses, from the way he handles conflict at school to the fascination with predators and victims in Iron Lake's own history. He doesn't just want a friendly father figure. He wants the truth about why Dexter left, why Rita died, and whether the darkness he feels means they are the same kind of monster. Instead of honesty, Dexter falls back on the old habits that doomed so many of his relationships. He keeps the Jim Lindsay identity, lies about his past in Miami, and withholds crucial details about Rita's murder and Deb's death. He tries to manage Harrison's behavior, like another crime scene, analyzing patterns and triggers while refusing to fully own his own life of killing. The result is a widening gap. Harrison senses the secrets, but can't yet name them, and that uncertainty fuels both his rage and his attraction to violence. We're going to dive deep into the long-term effects of this dynamic later, but the key failure here is simple. Dexter designs a plan where he controls the narrative, yet Harrison's very presence makes control impossible. Every half-truth, every delayed confession turns Harrison into both mirror and judge. The son becomes Dexter's greatest hope for a different legacy and the final jury on every choice he has ever made, raising the stakes higher than any Bay Harbor butcher investigation ever did. If Harrison is the jury on Dexter's entire life, Kurt Caldwell is the witness for the prosecution. Kurt walks into Dexter's quiet exile as living proof that small towns can hide predators just as easily as Miami ever did, and that the same patterns will always come back. Let's kick things off with who Kurt really is in Iron Lake. On the surface, he is the benevolent truck stop owner, the ex-hockey hero, the man who pays for locals' meals and comforts. Dexter stalks Kurt. Kurt invites Harrison to the diner, offers him work, praise, and a listening ear. He speaks to Harrison's pain, to his anger, to his barely controlled urges, and presents himself as the adult who actually sees him. Slowly, Kurt positions Dexter as the real danger, the cold, withholding father, the man who lies, the man whose presence always coincides with death. The same psychological leverage Dexter once used on killers in Miami is now being turned back on him through his own son. This creates a disturbing mirror effect. Kurt is a respected community figure with a secret ritualistic kill space. So was Dexter, back when he was the trusted blood spatter analyst with a tidy apartment and hidden tables wrapped in plastic. Kurt films his victims, controls their final moments, and preserves them as objects that affirm his power. Dexter, for years, curated blood slides and crime scenes that memorialized his own control. Watching Kurt charm Iron Lake while preying on its most disposable residents forces Dexter to confront an event that changed his self-image. He is not the noble exception. He is another version of this pattern. The stakes, then, are not limited to whether Dexter can kill Kurt without getting caught. The deeper question is whether Dexter can convincingly argue to Harrison and to himself that he is fundamentally different from the man he is hunting. If Kurt is a distorted reflection of Dexter's worst self, what happens when Harrison finally sees both images side by side and has to choose which one to believe? The answer to that choice is coming, and the consequences will shatter Dexter's illusion of control more completely than any Bay Harbor butcher investigation ever did. That shattering begins when Dexter makes the most dangerous decision of his entire life. He stops hiding the monster and tries to turn it into a family tradition. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the greatest gift Harry gave him was the code. Now, facing Harrison's pain and rage in Iron Lake, he convinces himself he can do one better. He will not only protect his son from the truth, he will share it, and in sharing, finally be understood. This would be the start of Dexter's final fatal experiment. Let's kick things off with Dexter's realization that Harrison is not just a traumatized teenager. Harrison attacks Ethan at school with chilling precision, then lies about it. He draws violent images, obsesses over injustice, and reacts with a sense of righteous anger that feels eerily familiar. When Harrison describes wanting to hurt people who hurt others, Dexter hears an echo of his own childhood urges. In that moment, Dexter discovers what he thinks is a second dark passenger in the family. Instead of seeing it once, we're going to dive deep into how catastrophic this is, ethically. Dexter is not protecting his child. He is recruiting him. He takes a boy who has already survived abandonment, neglect, and violence, and instead of seeking therapy, support, or distance from killing, he offers murder as a coping mechanism. Harry's choice to channel rather than cure Dexter's killing urges was a huge moral compromise that haunted Harry until his death. Dexter repeats that choice, but without Harry's ignorance or denial. The long-term effects of this decision will be even worse. Here's the pattern interrupt. For the first time, the prospective protege is not corrupted by Dexter's world. Harrison will ultimately reject the code, reject the dark passenger narrative, and reject Dexter's entire justification system. That rejection will not just end a plan, it will be a direct, personal verdict on Dexter's life. And when that verdict arrives, Dexter's illusion that the code can ever be a legacy will collapse in an instant, taking their relationship, and Dexter's last hope of being truly known, with it. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the real danger came from big city detectives, federal task forces, and elite profilers. What he never planned for was a small town sheriff in Iron Lake who simply did the work, trusted her instincts, and followed the digital trail straight through his new life. Angela Bishop enters the story framed as a quiet, overworked local cop, but the series quickly reveals a different truth. She is observant, methodical, and crucially, connected. As a former NYPD officer with access to national databases and colleagues across state lines, Angela is not operating on an island. She lives in a town where everyone knows everyone. Yet, she understands that modern policing means Iron Lake is only a few clicks away from Miami, the Bay Harbor Butcher, and Dexter Morgan's past victims. Let's kick things off with the moment technology betrays him. Angela runs a routine facial recognition search after seeing a photo from a conference in New York, where Jim Lindsay appears in the background with Molly Park. The system hits a match. Dexter Morgan, presumed dead in a hurricane. From that point on, the mask of Jim Lindsay is no longer a charming lumberjack persona. It is an active crime scene in her mind. The name change, the fake death, the carefully vague backstory about a dead wife and a quiet relocation all become inconsistencies to be probed, not quirks to be accepted. Molly Park's true crime work becomes Angela's accelerant. When Angela listens to Molly's Bay Harbor Butcher podcast, Iron Lake's isolation, and Angela's role as a small-town sheriff make him safe. He underestimates the power of databases, podcasts, and networked information, clinging to a code designed for an era before every face and fingerprint could be cross-checked in seconds. The long-term effects of that arrogance are devastating. His confidence in the code blinds him to a new kind of threat, one Harry never prepared him for. The irony is brutal. After escaping Doak's Lagerta, internal affairs, and a federal manhunt, Dexter is finally cornered by a local sheriff who simply connects the dots. Angela Bishop does not need to witness a kill or see the dark passenger directly. By believing victims, trusting data, and refusing to let contradictions slide, she becomes the one person in Iron Lake who truly discovers the man behind Jim Lindsay and starts the final collapse of Dexter's last identity. Angela's suspicion is one thing. Watching Dexter Morgan in an actual jail cell is another. For the first time, the Bay Harbor butcher is caged by the system Harry taught him to exploit. Not standing over a plastic-wrapped table, but sitting behind bars under fluorescent lights. Let's kick things off with the setup. Dexter is arrested in Iron Lake on what looks like a simple charge: the death of Matt Caldwell in the wilderness. Very quickly, Angela layers in more. She has the matching shell casings, the camera footage from the truck stop, and the inconsistencies in his story. Then she escalates again, connecting those Iron Lake murders to a pattern from Miami. For the first time throughout his life, Dexter hears the words Bay Harbor Butcher spoken to his face by someone who is not an ally or a victim. In that cramped interrogation room, Dexter falls back on the skill that has always saved him: talk. His strategy is classic Dexter. First, sow doubt. He questions the chain of custody on evidence, points out procedural gaps, and suggests that grief over Iris and pressure from the missing girls case are clouding Angela's judgment. Then he pivots to emotional manipulation. He invokes their relationship, reminds her of shared intimacy, and frames himself as a protective father whose only concern is Harrison's life and safety. The message is clear. Believing in Dexter means protecting the boy they both care about. But Angela does not fold. This is an event that changed the usual balance of power for Dexter. Instead of being the one with secret knowledge, he is the subject of a methodical, almost clinical, build of evidence. Angela brings in outside confirmation in the form of Angel Batista's information. Code has no clause for this situation. The dark passenger is trapped in a concrete box, and the only way out will require a choice that even Dexter has never had to make before. And that choice is what shatters his final plan. The only way out of that concrete box does arrive, but not as a clever manipulation or a perfectly staged kill room. It arrives as a panicked, physical struggle in a hallway, and it turns Dexter from controlled predator into a cornered animal. Let's kick things off with the scene itself. Dexter is locked in his cell, Angela's case closing in, the Bay Harbor butcher finally on paper. Logan is the guard on duty, the same coach who mentored Harrison, joked with him, backed him up on the wrestling mat. When Dexter fakes an injury and lures Logan close, the plan is still tactical. Grab the gun, escape, reach Harrison. But the moment Logan resists and goes for his own weapon, the struggle turns ugly. Dexter pulls him into a chokehold against the bars. Logan's neck snaps, and the sound lands like a verdict. Throughout his life, Dexter has told himself that every kill is calculated, justified by Harry's code, aimed at monsters who deserve to die. In the aftermath of Logan's death, he reaches for that same internal script. He frames it as necessary, a tragic but acceptable casualty in service of protecting his son and escaping what he sees as wrongful conviction. If he dies in that cell, Harrison is left alone, unprotected, possibly hunted by Angela's investigation into the dark passenger legacy. So, in Dexter's mind, the equation is simple. One dead cop to save his child and preserve the larger mission. But this is where that logic finally collapses. Logan is not a killer, not a Trinity, not a Miguel Prado gone rogue. He is an innocent cop, a genuinely good man, and someone Harrison openly respects and admires. There is no code-based rationale that can retrofit this into Dexter's old rules. No careful vetting, no trophies, no ritual, just a man doing his job, resisting an escape, and paying with his life. because Dexter refuses to face consequences. Here's the pattern interrupt. For once, the most important discovery in the episode is not Angela's case file. It is Harrison discovering what his father has just done. When Harrison arrives and sees Logan's body sprawled in the snow, hears Dexter admit that he killed him to get away. The entire narrative he has been sold about the code and targeting bad people disintegrates. This is the moment Harrison realizes the dark passenger is not a noble force channeled toward justice. It is a survival instinct that will kill anyone in its path. This would be the start of Harrison's final rejection. The long-term effects of Harry's training. The Bay. He tells Harrison that every kill, every lie, every body was for love and protection. He reframes Logan's death as a tragic necessity, a sacrifice to keep their imagined future alive. In Dexter's mind, this is one last attempt to turn chaos into a plan. But Harrison has already discovered a different pattern. Throughout his life, even before he could name it, violence followed Dexter like a shadow. Now in Iron Lake, Harrison can finally connect the dots. Rita, Deborah, the countless unnamed victims, Hannah's fugitive existence, and now Logan, an innocent man who died simply because Dexter refused to be caught. Harrison sees that Dexter is not cursed by bad luck. The common denominator is Dexter himself. So when Dexter reaches for the code, Harrison rejects it. He calls out the selfishness beneath the rhetoric, pointing out that real protection would have meant staying away, not dragging a traumatized teenager into a life of ritualized killing. Harrison names what no one has fully said to Dexter's face. The code is not a moral compass. It is a permission slip. It makes Dexter feel justified, but it does nothing for the victims left in his wake. For Harrison, repeating that pattern is not love. Ending it is. This leads to an event that changed Dexter more than any close call with Miami Metro. In a rare moment of clarity, Dexter finally looks at his life. From the outside, he sees Logan's body, Angela's ruined world, Harrison's haunted eyes, and realizes that every escape, every clever cover story, has only produced more collateral damage. The long-term effects of Harry's code, all those carefully managed urges, add up to a trail of devastation that even Dexter can no longer deny. So, he does something he has never truly done before. He stops trying to control the narrative. He tells Harrison simply that this is the only way out. He guides his son to the spot on his chest, effectively consenting to his own execution. The bullet that follows is not just the end of a plan gone wrong. It is the first and only time Dexter allows someone else's moral judgment to stand without manipulation. In that sense, this final shot is the definitive collapse. A life's worth of plans, finally held accountable by the one person Dexter cannot outthink, outrun, or outplay. Harrison becomes the verdict Harry never delivered, and the system never reached, setting up the question of what living with that choice will do to him next. Harrison's bullet doesn't just end Dexter's life. It ends the story Dexter has been telling about himself since childhood. To understand why every one of his plans eventually collapses, we're going to dive deep into that story's passenger metaphor works the same way. By externalizing his urges, Dexter can claim there is a separate entity that needs to be managed, bargained with, or occasionally indulged. That language lets him avoid full responsibility. When he lets Brian live too long, when he toys with Trinity, when he keeps Hannah around despite every warning sign, it is always the passenger that wants more. Dexter just happens to go along. But reality keeps refusing to honor that split. Dokes doesn't see a dark passenger. He sees a colleague making calculated choices. Lagerta doesn't hunt a monster. She follows a man's forensic trail. Rita and Deb are not collateral damage of an uncontrollable inner demon. They are victims of Dexter's decision to compartmentalize, to believe he can be perfect serial killer and perfect family man at the same time. This would be the start of the show's deeper argument. Dexter isn't a mastermind whose luck runs out in new blood. He is a man clinging to a myth that was never true. And each failed plan is reality punching through that myth. Logan's death in the jail cell proves the code no longer restrains him. When cornered, he kills an innocent cop to escape, then still tells Harrison he only ever killed those who deserved it. The gap between Dexter's narrative and the truth is now lethal in real time. An event that changed the way this series reads, especially in hindsight, is this slow dismantling of control. By the end, the fantasy of perfect murder has given way to a different story. Violence that always leaks, always spreads, and can never be fully contained. In the next section, we're going to trace how that leakage plays out across every relationship Dexter ever tried to protect. That leakage is not random. It follows a pattern. From Miami to Iron Lake, every time Dexter thinks the dark passenger is under control, the universe answers with another collapse, each one bigger, bloodier, and closer to home. Let's kick things off with those early failures in Miami. When the fantasy of the perfect predator first cracks, the ice truck killer, Brian Moser, does not just taunt Dexter with chopped up victims. He studies the code, dissects Dexter's rituals, and weaponizes them against Deborah. Brian lures Deb into danger, manipulates Dexter's loyalties, and proves that someone who truly understands his urges can turn his secrecy into a trap. Almost immediately, Sergeant Dokes becomes the second fracture. Through instinct alone, Dokes sees through the mask, follows Dexter, confronts him in the Everglades, and forces an unplanned imprisonment scenario that the code never accounted for. The Bay Harbor Butcher case is where the system Dexter built literally turns on him. The investigation is constructed out of his own forensic signatures, is not just a plot twist. It is an event that changed the meaning of every earlier win. The cost of Bay Harbor, of Dokes, of Miguel, all suddenly crystallizes into a murdered spouse and a blood-soaked child. Deborah's discovery completes the mid-series arc of collapse. She walks in on Dexter, killing Travis Marshall, instantly ending the illusion that his double life can be permanently hidden from the person he loves most. From that moment, every choice drags Deb further from Harry's ideals. Late-stage failures push the pattern to its endpoint. LaGuerta's investigation uses the same behavioral trails that once protected Dexter, turning the code into a roadmap. Deb's decision to kill LaGuerta to save Dexter marks her full moral corruption, and the long-term effects of that moment lead directly to her death. The hurricane escape pretends to be a self-sacrificial ending, but it is another flight from consequences. By the time Iron Lake offers Dexter an abstinence fantasy, the pattern is already written. His attempt to live quietly collapses the moment he starts killing again, drawing Harrison into the cycle. When Harrison pulls the trigger, it does not feel like a shocking reversal. It reads as the only logical conclusion to a chain that began with Harry's first compromise with the dark passenger. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how each person who discovered Dexter became another link in that chain, and why none of them could truly walk away untouched. All of this brings us to the uncomfortable truth at the center of Dexter's story. The real tragedy is not simply that Dexter kills. It is that throughout his life, he convinces himself killing can be managed like a night shift. Clock in, follow the code, take out the dark passenger, then clock out and go home to pancakes with Harrison. The series exists to prove that separation is a fantasy. Let's kick things off with the illusion of control. From the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation to Trinity, Dexter believes he can keep his urges in a locked box, away from love, family, and community. Yet every perfect plan drags those exact people into the blast radius. Rita dies in the bathtub Trinity chose. Deb walks in on Travis Marshall on Dexter's table. Harrison grows up in the shadow of a father who keeps disappearing into the night. The more Dexter insists his two lives are separate, the more the narrative shows they are the same life with the same consequences. Each failed plan peels back a different layer of self-deception. Early on, Dexter lies to himself about his nature, repeating Harry's mantra that he was born wrong and can only kill as a moral center. By rejecting the code and insisting on ending the cycle, he reframes the entire narrative as a cautionary tale about inherited trauma. Harry passed the code to Dexter. Dexter tries to pass it to Harrison. Harrison's choice to pull the trigger is not an embrace of violence. It is a refusal to keep pretending this violence can be managed. In the end, the question hanging over the series turns back on the audience. Was Dexter ever a hero, or were viewers like Dexter seduced by a narrative of control that collapses under scrutiny? In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how each discovery scene chips away at that narrative, exposing the fragile architecture of Dexter's double life. So now, it turns outward. After tracing every discovery and every collapse of control, the question becomes, at what precise moment did Dexter lose the ability to steer his own life for good? Throughout his life, Dexter insisted that Harry's code and meticulous planning kept the dark passenger contained. Yet, somewhere between the first careful kill and that final impulsive snap of Logan's neck, control stopped being anything more than a story. For some viewers, that breaking point arrives with Dokes, framing an innocent colleague as the Bay Harbor Butcher is more than a tactical move. It is an event that changed the entire moral landscape of the series. Dexter chooses self-preservation over the code's supposed respect for innocent victims, and Lila's intervention finishes what he started. Did control really survive the moment he accepted Dokes' death as a necessary cost? Others point to Trinity. Dexter lets Arthur Mitchell live inside his orbit for far too long, juggling a fantasy of mentorship and normal family life, while ignoring every warning sign. This would be the start of Rita's murder, Harrison's trauma, and the unraveling of any claim that the code protects the people Dexter loves. If the dark passenger ever truly drove, it was in the quiet spaces where Dexter convinced himself he had more time. Then there is Lagerta. When she discovered the pattern behind the Bay Harbor Butcher case and followed the evidence back to Dexter, the code presented a clear rule: do not kill the innocent. His decision to execute her in that shipyard, with Deborah watching, did more than save his secret. It shattered the last illusion that his urges could be ethically managed. Was that the moment when the narrative of control finally collapsed beyond repair? And, in New Blood, Logan's death is almost the opposite of a plan. No ritual, no preparation, just a panicked chokehold that ends a good